Okay, good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing? Good evening, all. How's everyone? Let me know that you can hear me okay. Yeah, let me know the audio is good and that you're very well. Thank you, all of you who are joining or who have been, yeah, or who've been in here waiting all along. It's great to have people in the house. We've already got 440 viewers concurrently, which is a good number for us to start off with. I don't think this is going to be a very long stream, so late arrivers aren't going to get very much because this is just going to be kind of a playback. I haven't prepared much of a presentation around it because I feel the entire subject I think it deserves more of my attention in terms of how I'm synthesizing a lot of this new research and data that's been coming to light. But I saw this video and it's actually quite a good video. I like the channel, by the way, as well. This fella, I can't. What I put on this video. Why have I forgotten his name? All of a sudden, it's having a complete brain block. But he's got a cool channel. It's a history/anthropological channel. He doesn't really get involved in the politics. And I think he does a good job. He kind of presents stuff in a really chilled out, laid back way. And where I have to really give him a commendation on this one is that this is something I should do more often. Actually, a paper came out regarding human origins, or at least the origins of non-Africans, I should say, and Neanderthals, and he actually managed to pull in the authors of the paper, which is actually just a really good idea. In my view, he did an excellent job. Yeah, in my view, he's done a really excellent job in doing that, and I really respect his approach there. I don't know how successful I would be, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to try getting people, or at least get them. I mean, we do. I'm not gonna lie. I do a lot of reaching out, and the response rate isn't always as positive as I'd like it to be. But I think that's going to increase with time. So in some ways, this is quite interesting, eye-opening, and somewhat of a kick up the butt for me to kind of say I need to get back on that again and try and get more people who write papers and who publish articles and journals to get up here and really explain their work. I think it's a good idea. And yeah, I'm going to definitely give credit where it's due there. So let me give a few shout outs, and then, as I told you, we're going to kind of play the video. Like I said before, I am not, I don't think this is going to be a massively long stream. I've got a few bits of feedback kind of that I'll probably jump in to give here and there. But as you guys know, when it comes particularly to the subject of genetics, I do very much take a tread carefully approach in terms of the conclusions that I draw, because I think it's a minefield, and I think a lot of people declare things with a lot of absolute assurity in a field where there is none. And so it's really important that we just kind of we approach the subject with that level of regard and that level of respect. So shout out to Sarah, or Sarah, I should say. It says, has anyone heard about Algeria threatening Sahel states of war? That's ridiculous. I don't know why they would do that. I guess they're doing France's bidding there. If that is the case, I wouldn't put it past them. Sky Kingston, assuming this is about their true DNA, lineage, and age, all the things they fantasized, sort of. Said another banger on the way, Sky King. I appreciate that. I'll try. Like I said, I don't want to disappoint anyone. I'm not going to talk that much. It's more a case of I wanted to show you this study, which I think is really interesting, and it allows the geneticist to speak, which I think is really important as well. So that's really the main motivator behind this. There is a little bit of reinforcement for some of the stuff that we discussed already on previous live streams. So yeah, that's been pretty cool to see that. Hello, Macy, Talia, Petrina, Yehudi. That's old news. Tinubu got that shut down 5 minutes later. Majority of the military share lineage with the Sahel countries. No one ain't going to war. Tinubu, Nigeria will go to war with no neighbours. Okay, that's interesting. Tinubu doing something to benefit Africa is always nice. Let me not say too much. But thank you for the update there, Sky King. It's a bit of a relief, to be honest with you. Raleigh, hello, Zehoven, Wesker, how you doing? Jonathan, Grace, DR, first time here, let's go. Silly Moo, Retain Ascension, Veli Sanchez, first time as well. Welcome, you're very, very welcome. James, Renaissance Woman, Macy, I'm sure I've already said that. Michael, Barnes, Zehoven, I'm sure I'm repeating that as well. Maybe I'm just used to the fact that you guys always join me, which I also obviously very much appreciate. T. Warren, Mythical Legends, and a donation from, let's put you on the screen, Marcus Antonius Was Black. That's a cool name. £2 donation. Shout out to my UK Don. Algeria will lose. Make a Carthage vid for them. I think my Carthage vid is on the way. I've got a couple of books. I bought about 3 books on Carthage. Well, I did that. I'm not gonna act like I did it the other day. I did about 6 months ago, with my intention of really going deep and kind of tackling the whole history of Carthage and Hannibal, etc., etc., etc. Just haven't found the time to put that together yet. So bear with me. I will get there. I will definitely get there, in fact. Lejeya7, greetings, and a name that's written in Meduneta, so I can't read it. See if I can read it. That says K. I don't know. I don't know what the man standing up is pronounced, but that says Su afterwards. So I've got K and I've got S and I got a U. So K something S U. You tell us what your name reads. The person whoever this is, tell us what your name reads. I got the K or the G, the K G sound, and the S and the U. But that's all I got. Niall Bratcher. Okay, on that note, let's get started. Kapruki's in the house as well. Hello, and Renz. I think that's everyone. Yeah, that is everyone. All right, so if you put a comment from now, your name may or may not get read out because I need to move on at this stage. Okay, let's get going. So I think I've already kind of given it an intro, and I feel like we're there or there enough now where we can kind of just like get started with this. If you're happy to, guys, I think we'll just kind of like dive in, talk about it a little bit. I feel like actually it might be a good idea for us to do a little bit of a recap of where we were the last, because it does go off the back of the live stream that we just done really well, which was the live stream about European DNA and Cheddar Man and all of those things. Just trying to think. No, let's just dive in, and then if it comes relevant, we can always dive back again. So yeah, that's it. Let's get going. So welcome everyone. Let's crack on. So I can minimize this, I think. Cool. So Stefan Milo, there you go. I was trying to remember the name of the guy's channel, Stefan Milo. Feel free to check him out. Like I said, cool channel. I've always seen pretty good content from him, quite original approach. He's European focused, but that's fine. Particularly if you're European, it kind of makes sense. Actually, I prefer people who are European focused than the European people who are African focused with agenda. That's why I can't stand. So yeah. Anyway, I think on that note, if everyone's okay, we'll crack on. Put a 1 when I click play and it starts playing. Just put a 1 to let me know that it's audible, or 2 if you don't hear anything. Okay.
There's a really interesting debate brewing in Paleolithic archaeology. I'm sure you're all aware that our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals. Folks like this. It's in your DNA results, it's widely reported in the news. It's probably the fact most people know about human evolution and Paleolithic. But what you might not know is that the estimated date for this Paleolithic lovemaking is getting younger and younger. But at the same time, archaeological evidence for Homo sapiens outside of Africa is seemingly getting older and older and older. The reason why this is important and why it's generating this debate is because they're both intimately connected to this event called Out of Africa.
Now, I'm just going to quickly jump in on the point that he's just made there because I think it's important to note what he stated. He basically said that the time, or at least the estimated date for when humans interbred with Neanderthals is essentially, well, it's getting nearer and nearer to where we are at the moment. So he said younger and younger. He said it's getting nearer and nearer. However, what they're also finding simultaneously is that Africans left the continent of Africa much earlier than they initially thought. Now, this straight away should ring kind of like question marks / alarm bells to you, because essentially we're told that all non-Africans carry Neanderthal ancestry. All of them, every last one of these non-Africans. But what he's saying there suggests that there is a long period of time where humans were on or outside of the African continent and not interbred with Neanderthal. Now, you guys know what my perspective is. My perspective is any human that has, the only humans currently on the planet who have no Neanderthal ancestry are all essentially phenotypically Black African. So my reasoning is that the default expression of Homo sapien sapien in their 100% non-admixed form is a phenotypically Black African, because that's the only expression of it we have in modern times. And as you can see, we have lots of different modern expressions of physicality, but the only one of those that has 100% Homo sapien sapien DNA is your full Black African. So for me, it's a logical, one thing I'm just going for logic here, it seems to be a logical leap to suggest that the humans who ended up basically being outside of Africa around the rest of the world, who weren't interbred with Neanderthal. By the way, I'm not saying that the ones that carry Neanderthal aren't Black, but I'm saying the ones, so just before anyone raises kind of like a logical fallacy there, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying all of the ones that weren't interbred with Neanderthal would be very close to what your modern Black African looks like. The ones that have Neanderthal, that's where you'll probably get much more of that kind of like modern Eurasian variants from, but the ones without would remain, I'd imagine, have that same kind of variety you see amongst Black Africans. So that to me seems really logical. And the reason I raise that, by the way, is it goes hand in hand with the other discoveries they're finding. We already know that, for instance, the Natufian ancestry had little or no Neanderthal. A lot of Western hunter-gatherer had little or no Neanderthal. So a lot of these populations that actually run really late into, really late into the Holocene, and who remained unadmixed with Neanderthal, we're finding out they were Black. Okay, they're pulling up these skulls, they're doing their genetic testing, they're looking at the physical phenotyping of these skulls, and they're coming up as clustering with modern Black Africans. So these two facts seem to be going hand in hand. Okay, that's just I just thought it was interesting that he said that, and it reminded me of that. But that's it. I'm gonna just let it play on now.
One of the most significant moments in the evolution of modern humans. So let's dive into this debate. When did modern Homo sapiens leave Africa? When did we have a dalliance with our Neanderthal cousins?
And I just wanted to point out here, you guys remember I had a issue when I was reviewing the "What Race Were the Eats the Egyptian" video done by Luke Caverns. We know that these are just illustrations, and ultimately illustrations are meaningless. But when you're painting a picture of history, they become meaningful. And one thing I appreciate about this guy, Stefan Milo, is that he's obviously acknowledging archaic mankind would have been a melanated species. Not saying that I would have done this exact imagery, but this certainly doesn't offend me. This is much closer to the truth than most people, when they broach these topics, are willing to do. So, yeah, I appreciate this effort. I definitely appreciate this effort.
And what does any of that have to do with this extremely ancient pig? Just need to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, KiwiCo.
Okay, I'm going to have to skip your sponsor, I'm afraid, mate. Sorry. Let's jump ahead. I think it's here. Right here.
This whole debate about the timing of Neanderthal love and its impact on archaeology was really brought into focus by two recent papers. Neanderthal Ancestry Through Time, Insights from Genomes of Ancient and Present-Day Humans by Leonardo Yassi et al. And Earliest Modern Human Genomes, Constrained Timing of Neanderthal Admixture by Arev Sumej et al. Fortunately for me, I was able to chat to both of them about this. So hopefully this all turns out well. All right, I think we have to start this with a little bit of obligatory nuance. I think there is some confusion about what geneticists mean when they say out of Africa. Hominins, upright walking apes, likely, very, very likely evolved in Africa, because it's where our two closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, live, and it's where all the oldest fossils live, like this one here, Mrs. Ples, an Australopithecus. Every fossil older than 2 million years old has been found in Africa. However, from around 2 million years ago, it seems that a hominin, likely an early form of Homo erectus, left Africa. We have some really important sites like Dmanisi in Georgia, but also really far away in Asia, in China, in Java. A Homo erectus-like hominin from 2 million years ago was living across Africa and Europe and Asia. No doubt in the course of 2 million years of evolution, there were many more migrations out of Africa. And there were also probably migrations back into Africa. You know, there's no hard geographical barrier here. In 2 million years, there's going to be a lot of movement. But all of that is not really what geneticists mean when they say out of Africa.
Yes, so there's actually multiple out of Africa, but what people usually refer to is like the movement of our ancestors, like that actually contributed the ancestry to present-day individuals. These movement roughly 60,000 years ago, that we call out of Africa. Like, at least that is what we call out of Africa.
There are...
Now, one of the things you'll note is that the bar for out of Africa keeps moving. Now, what you'll find, particularly I did mention like the Max Planck Institute and Johannes, I'm trying to remember this guy's name, Krauss. There are some very, very agendaed people out there, researchers out there who are very hell-bent on making out of Africa a single migration. They're hell-bent on it. Because what they essentially want to do is they want to create this separation which essentially reinforces racial thinking. And not only reinforces racial thinking, but also then causes them to lay claim. So, for instance, where geography has failed and where phenotype has failed, i.e., they've tried it on a geographic level, they've tried it on a phenotypic level as well. So they've said, okay, cool. All these people are Caucasoid. So this is what I mean when I say a phenotypic level. So they've tried to say, okay, cool. We're going to claim all of everything that exhibits these features. But now even that's failing. So even the attempt to kind of claim history, using phenotype or phrenology as a tool, that's failing as well. So what they're doing is they move the bar to a genetic level and they try and claim it on that level. But that's failing as well, because genetics is coming back and it's telling us that the people that you are trying to claim are physically more, have more in common with these populations here. So where both of those have failed, they're now trying their third tact, and that's to say we're actually everything that basically takes place outside of this specific group here, and that group, I'm sure you guys have guessed it, is sub-Saharan Africans. So everything that takes place outside of sub-Saharan Africa, we're now going to lay claim to. We're going to say that that's a part, or anything outside of sub-Saharan Africa is a part essentially of this out of Africa group. So we're going to essentially claim the entire world apart from, essentially the equatorial region and south of the equator in Africa. That's what they're trying to do. And it does really feel ominously like a real desperate plea. By the way, I'm not saying that's what's happening in this video here. I'm talking specifically about the Max Planck approach, because they're doing this right now with a lot of their studies that they're releasing. They're being really, really vehement about this. And it's just something that we need to be aware of, because logic says that out of Africa was not a single occurrence. And by the way, someone said there's no such thing as sub-Saharan Africa. Of course there isn't. It's a complete invention to try and isolate certain groups, because even when they say sub-Saharan Africa, they don't even sample half of the sub-Saharan African groups. And a lot of sub-Saharan African groups, they still try to claim them on a genetic or phenotypic level. So they're not even strict with sub-Saharan Africa itself. But the Sahara, as we know, has never been a barrier. There's never been any evidence that movement in and around Sahara hasn't been vibrant. And there's never been any evidence that anyone other than Africans inhabited Africa up until very, very recently. They are very aware of that. They're very aware of these facts, and yet they will try to propagate and perpetuate these falsities, these fake names, these, sub-Saharan, these labels to try and kind of claim African history. So the point being is that they are trying to make the Out of Africa movement a single movement. And in making the Out of Africa movement a single movement, they can then say everything that you see taking place, not only across the rest of the world, Europe, Asia, the Americas, also in the north of Africa, anything that takes place, within the last 60,000 years is part of this big non-African Neanderthal supergroup. That's what they're trying to build towards. Okay. And this is why we have to be quite kind of schooled up and educated about who these groups were, how these groups identified. And actually the thing that I'm going to press here is there's not one, and this is their own geneticists say, this David Reich video that I showed you that I'll probably pull up again before the end of the stream, said there were multiple, in fact, I would say just continuous movements out of Africa where African diversity via separate introgressions into Europe was spread across Europe. That's the big picture of what happened. But they're trying to kind of spin that around against Africans at the moment. So this is one of the things that's really clear that we have to be quite careful of. And I'm not accusing the people in this video, but I'm talking about what's happening, and particularly with agendered institutes like the Max Planck Institute, where they are really trying to spin a narrative about African history.
Many lines of genetic evidence that support this. This isn't really the video about that evidence. The simplest one to explain right now is that Africa is home to the greatest genetic diversity.
So it's already sort of known since 1987, where Mark Stonking, who used to be a group leader here, and some colleagues published a paper on mitochondrial genomes. And they saw that on the Y chromosome, we see the same thing, that all the diversity that is outside of Africa is actually maintained within Africa. So populations in Africa have all the diversity that we see in these uniparental markers that are outside of Africa. which indicates the origin of this other populations outside of Africa is also lies within Africa. Also, when we look at
Now, that is one of the main sound bites that I want you to take on today. Okay, I'm going to rewind that because it's really important that we understand what's been communicated here by this geneticist, and I'm going to play it back again because this has been very much an arguing point, certainly an argument point that I've been having with lots of people. I raised this initially when we talked about Rick Hittle's and Shamorka Keita's paper about the interpreting African genetic diversity. We spoke about the fact that all of the variety that's seen throughout the world can be found in Africa. All of it, all of the diversity. And she was quite clear about that. She didn't stutter. And she said this diversity, the diversity that is seen on not only the mitochondrial lineage, i.e. your maternal lineage, but also on your Y lineage, your paternal lineage. We see it on both sides of the spectrum, that the entirety, she didn't say some, she didn't say a little bit, she said the entirety of diversity that's seen in the European continent, or in Eurasia, I shouldn't say European continent, throughout Eurasia is maintained on the African continent. Africa contains all of that diversity. That's very, very clear. So I'm going to just play it back now so you can hear that again. And no one is unclear about this. All right, so let's play that back.
Evidence. The simplest one to explain right now is that Africa is home to the greatest genetic diversity.
So it's already sort of known since 1987, where Mark Stonking, who used to be a group leader here, and some colleagues published a paper on mitochondrial genomes. And they saw that on the Y chromosome, we see the same thing, that all the diversity that is outside of Africa is actually maintained within Africa. So populations in Africa have all the diversity that we see in these uniparental markers that are outside of Africa, which indicates the origin of this other populations outside of Africa is also lies within Africa. Also, when we look at the nuclear genomes, we see the same thing. So as we go away from the African continent, sequencing genomes of all the people living around, we see that as we go further away, the diversity decreases.
All of this is...
So that needs to be clear. She said also the nuclear, so that's your aDNA. Okay, so she's spoken about the fact that Y DNA, that's paternal lineage, mitochondrial DNA, that's your maternal lineage, and the nuclear DNA, that's the autosomal DNA. Across all three, that's basically what those are the kind of three major strata that we have to analyze when it comes to genetics. Across all of them, we see the diversity, the entirety of the diversity. So when you see these phylogenetic tables that attempt to essentially isolate Africa off to the side somewhere and then indicate this split, and then they show you all of this variety across Europe and Asia, all of these different markers. The problem with people who analyze these and goes, oh, this is that marker, that's that marker, this is that marker, is that you've heard it quite clearly say all of that variance is found on the African continent. She didn't stutter. She didn't say, oh, we know that there was an early split, and from that split, lots of subsets of variety were created throughout Europe and Asia, and these subsets of variety were maintained. She could have said that. She didn't say that. She said all of the variety we see in the haplotypes, i.e. she was quite clear, all of that haplotype variety that we see throughout the world is maintained within Africa. That was clear. She did not stutter. In fact, let's listen to it one more time, just to make sure that I'm not putting words in her mouth here. Okay? Because this is something that people have a hard time understanding, because I think a lot of people think they understand African genetic diversity. They really do. They think they understand it. Oh, African genetic diversity. I understand Africa is really diverse. And then they kind of move on and they go back to the same talking points. No, you don't understand it. You do not understand that African genetic diversity is not just that Africans have variety which they obviously have their own indigenous variety, but it's also that they have the variety of the entire rest of the world. That is what is clear. Okay, that's being stated quite clearly. So let's just play that back again so that everyone can be clear that this is what's being said.
The video about that evidence, the simplest one to explain right now is that Africa is home to the greatest genetic diversity.
So it's already sort of known since 1987, where Mark Stonking, who used to be a group leader here, and some colleagues published a paper on mitochondrial genomes. And they saw that on the Y chromosome, we see the same thing, that all the diversity that is outside of Africa is actually maintained within Africa. So populations in Africa have all the diversity that we see in these uniparental markers that are outside of Africa, which indicates the origin of this other populations outside of Africa lies within Africa. Also, when we look at the nuclear genomes, we see the same thing. So as we go away from the Africa continent, sequencing genomes of all the people living around, we see that as we go further away, the diversity decreases.
All of this is extremely strong evidence that our ancestors evolved in Africa, or you could say...
So I'm just going to pause there really quickly because I have a bit of a thank you to give. Thank you to Macy. So genetics, just like all sciences, are not exact. It's basically probabilities. Like you said, all markers are African. And it's like we've discussed already. We've had this discussion before and people have tried to poo-poo them. But I don't think the people who essentially try to dissuade this fact truly understand the variety that's in Africa. Because what you'll find is that people will kind of show you these maps and these markers have these really hard, like they'll show you this marker that has this particular location in, I don't know, Eastern Europe or something. And it's got a very hard line. And first of all, we know that lines wouldn't be hard, they'll be diffuse, but what they won't show is that wherever that marker is showing in Europe or wherever it is in Asia, this, that, and the other, there will be a version of it in Africa. There will always be a version of it in Africa. She didn't say sometimes. Remember, this isn't my words, okay? I hope I'm not misquoting her. She said all of the haplotype diversity is found in Africa. So that then leaves you with two possibilities. At least this is how it works in my mind. Feel free to jump in. But it leaves you with two possibilities. Okay. The first one is the possibility that is largely being sold by a lot of the kind of like more racial institutes where they basically talk about late and recent introgressions back into the African continent. I.e., you have these back migrations. You've probably heard that term before, where for some reason, sporadic groups outside of Africa found their way back into the African in order to drop their genes there and then disappear. Okay. And this seemed to happen with every single population over the world, as you can see, because all of the varieties found in Africa. So at some point, every group that has left Africa has found their way back to Africa again, based on their own science. So then that possibility only leaves us with one conclusion, and that means that Africa was basically the trading hub of the world. Okay. I mean, we don't see this kind of variety in the Fertile Crescent. And yet we're told the Fertile Crescent is where it was all at. Oh, the Fertile Crescent, that's where all these people are doing trade and this, that, and the other. And that's where civilization developed this, that, and the other. Well, then, if that was the case, we would see all of that diversity in the Fertile Crescent. If we don't see that diversity in the Fertile Crescent and we see it in Africa, then that means Africa is where everything was because everyone kept coming back to it. Now, I'm not sure if I go for that. I'll go for version 2, which is the one that I've said quite often, and that's that these markers are all African and they were spread to the rest of the world via out of Africa events, multiple out of Africa events. Okay, so one group would leave, and then a few thousand years later, another group would leave, and 100 years later, another. And Africa just basically, through continuous out of Africa events, spread their genetics through the world. To me, that's a logical conclusion. Now, the only problem with the logical conclusion is that it takes a huge, massive crapping dump on racism. Okay, it takes a massive dump on racism. It's not a version of the world that they want to have to deal with. but they're going to have to deal with one or the other, because the back migration theory says Africa is as great as the African origination theory. I can't think of a third theory. I can't think of another theory that caused everyone to come back to Africa and nowhere else in the world. You have to explain that. Yeah, so that's kind of why that's where my mind is at the moment with all of this. But anyway, let it carry on playing.
Probably from like the past 400,000 or 500,000 years, almost certainly they were in Africa. Then, of course, at some point, some of them left. And what's really interesting thing that ancient genetics has revealed, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it seems that our ancestors left in the same migration. Is it fair to say that even if you are an Aboriginal Australian or someone that lives, like a Sami person in the far north of Europe, you both descend from this migration out of Africa significantly?
Yes.
And your Neanderthal ancestry comes from there. This is what we know, that you, like the Sami, the small parts of your Neanderthal DNA in you, if you're a Sami or an Aboriginal Australian, you do share definitely, or this is what we think, you do share this ancestry from an event that took place around 47,000 years ago.
This is what you find in your paper, right? You see that everybody's Neanderthal ancestry is correlating, which means that they must have share a common ancestor that was in this group that interbred with the same group of Neanderthals.
Right? It's not that, let's say, one group left, met Neanderthals, went to Europe, and then, independent from that, a group left, met Neanderthals, went to Oceania. No, it was like probably that what we think. It's like one group left, and kind of are still in one population where they met Neanderthals, and then they diversify. And that gives us a hint about what happened in the Out of Africa event, right? It must have been one group.
So because all of our...
So the question mark here, you hear what they're saying, one group left, and then they diversified. But the question is, how did that diversity come about? Because you have to reconcile the fact that was established is that all of that diversity that you're speaking about on a genetic level exists on the African continent. You have to reconcile those two things. Okay? Africa is not going to, for want of a better word, you can call it evolve or mutate or whatever it is. We're talking about Y-DNA, and we're talking about uniparental differences here between the Eurasian and the African continent. They're not going to rhyme, okay? They're going to mutate differently. Mutations are largely kind of random things, aren't they? Yeah, so if they're rhyming, which is what they are, they're exactly the same, then we know that contact has taken place. So yes, you might have a single event that you're pointing to, at least that's what they're pointing to, but you then also have to point to the fact that there would have been multiple other contact events. And I guess the question mark is, which direction did they take place in? I.e., it could be both directions. I would say majority out, some in. But the point of the matter is we have to have this discussion. They have to reconcile the fact that Africa has has all of the genetic diversity of the rest of the world. That is something that literally cannot be ignored,
Our ancestors left in the same migration, and it seems we all picked up Neanderthal DNA from this one period of love making. In a sense, the timing of this Neanderthal input puts a ceiling on Out of Africa because...
But then this is where the question mark comes, and this is where David Reich's, I would say controversial, but I also feel like they've largely been, well, not largely, they've somewhat been accepted now about how Neanderthal or how human are non-African populations. My words, not his, by the way. But his hypothesis is basically that non-Africans are Neanderthals, and this is just semantics, by the way, because it doesn't matter, because we know the percentages that they are Homo sapien, and we know the percentage that they are Neanderthal. But he's saying that they are Neanderthals who experience waves and waves and waves of human integration, not one, multiple. So he's saying there might have been one event, but then it's taken waves and waves and waves and waves and waves of introgression from the African continent to make that difference that occurs between, people who are completely Homo sapien sapien and people who are mixed with Neanderthal. He's saying that's a series of events that caused that to happen. So that somewhat contradicts with what's being said here. So you kind of see there's different schools of thought when it comes to this subject. I think what I will do is I will put on the David Wright video just to kind of remind us what he was saying after we've finished with this one.
It must have happened when the group was small enough and close enough for these genes to be widely distributed. Which is why it's so interesting that Leonardo said it happened roughly 47,000 years ago. Let's dig into that. That's really important. So let's start with Arev's paper. Hers was really, really interesting because Arev and the team actually sequenced the oldest modern human DNA ever sequenced so far. The first specimen came from a place called Zlatý Kůň, which means golden horse, and that's in Czechia. It's this ridge of yellow rock, seems to be. There in the 1950s, the remains of a woman were found, but because she was found so long ago, didn't have...
Aren't you surprised they haven't done a... Actually, I'm speaking too soon, I can say. Aren't you surprised they haven't done a reconstruction? But they probably have. So let me just speak too soon. And the reason I'm just laughing at that is because this skull with the big hole in the face doesn't remind you of that that one that we looked at, the Trojan, the Mycenaean / Trojan woman whose face they reconstructed from nothing but a nothing but a skull and a hole. Yeah, sorry, that just reminded me of it. Let me carry on.
Knowledge and techniques we have now that kind of create a problem for geneticists and archaeologists.
So in Zlatý Kůň, it's a great cave system, but there is only one individual. Skeletal elements that are related to only one individual were discovered without any archaeological context. And it was not possible to radiocarbon date this individual, the remains from this individual, because they were treated with animal glue back in the days in order to preserve the skeletal elements. However, the problem with that is that it brings contamination, collagen contamination, and then all the radiocarbon dates you would maintain from this specimen will be shifted to younger dates because of this extra contamination of glue, collagen contamination. So it was not possible to get a date from this individual, but genetics showed that this individual must be older than 45,000 years.
Any Homo sapien remains in Europe older than 45,000 years, or around 45,000 years, are going to be extremely important because all...
So I'm just going to pull that back. So a little comparison there. So this is a 42,000-year-old Homo sapien skull and a 45,000-year-old Homo Neanderthalis skull. It's interesting because some people think that Homo Neanderthal should be called Homo sapien Neanderthal, but that was actually abandoned, I think, in the 70s or something. So they were calling it Homo sapien Neanderthal because they said they were closely related and therefore the same species. But then that was ruled against, and they decided that Neanderthal was a different species, and so therefore were called Homo Neanderthal and Homo sapien. So technically you don't have to say Homo sapien sapien either. I know I say that a lot, but Homo sapien sapien was said at the same time that Neanderthal was called Homo sapien Neanderthal. And since we don't call it Homo sapien Neanderthal anymore, we can just call modern humans Homo sapiens. Sorry, I just want to explain that.
5,000 years, or around 45,000 years, are going to be extremely important because all the evidence suggests that's when, modern humans arrived and never left. Arev was able to get the highest coverage genome so far from this Zlatý Kůň.
So modern humans arrived and never left is a bit of a, this is, once again, the language. This is the language where I raise a question mark and I'm like, well, what does that mean? Modern humans arrived. So when you say they never left, this, once again, that sounds like the kind of language which reinforces a hard delineation between modern humans arriving in Europe and modern humans in Africa, and the two never having, any contact for 50,000 years. And that's just not supported, once again, by the, DNA the DNA variety or variation that's already been highlighted, where they mirror each other and therefore you have to assume contact has taken place, but also with the fact that it would have taken more than a single, meeting with this group that first interbred with Homo Neanderthal. It would have taken multiple, I guess, meetings for them to eventually become the varied Eurasian landscape that we see now. That didn't happen with just a single meeting, and the further kind of variety that took place didn't happen without regular contact with the African continent. So just kind of like putting up that language that's being used there, because I just slightly agree with it. I slightly disagree with it.
Woman, we are able to see it in the highest resolution yet. The other samples in Aref's study.
Sorry. See, I know you said this is a joke. You're saying Afro sapiens would be a more accurate term to use. Ha ha. I actually think it would be. I think the term Afro would actually be a really useful term to pull in with the discussion of Homo sapiens. I think it would correct a lot of the misinformation that we're being given at the moment. So I actually think Homo Afro sapiens is a really useful term. I do, genuinely. I'm sorry. I think it's a useful term. Someone said Homo Africus or Homo Africanus. Yeah, why not? Let's be clear. And then that way we don't have to play around with all of this gray area and fuzzy logic that's being used to kind of like distance people and try and no. This is the percentage that you're Homo Africanus or Homo Afrosapien. And this is the percentage that you're Homo Euro Neanderthalis or Homo Eurasia Neanderthal. Yeah, that would be useful. I think that's a useful term. I like it. Sorry. I mess with that. I'm glad you said that. All right, let's go.
Came from a site called Ranis in Germany, and this place looks incredible. It's like a little bit like a fairy tale, basically. These human remains were recovered underneath this cliff. I think I'm right in...
So I'm just going to pause this here and read out this donation, $10 donation. Thank you, Turtle Island ADOS, for your $10 donation. You said, I'm unclear as to where Neanderthals originate. Is their DNA also from the African continent? That's a really good question, because there are studies that suggest that there were Neanderthals in the African continent. Now, I don't know if that, I'm going by mainstream science here though. The idea was that they were, and they too migrated, but when they migrated to Europe, there was no mixing on the African continent. And then when they migrated to Europe, that's where the mixing occurred. But the one that on the African continent, apparently there was no extensive mixing that took place. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm not even going to try and give you a definitive answer, because this is well outside of my field of kind of like expertise or my field of knowledge. Okay. It's worth looking into. What we know, I'm going by what we're given in these studies and what we know about genetics to kind of draw these conclusions. But I'm not sure about those fine details about the origins of Neanderthal. I think it's a very good question. Feel free to help Turtle Island ADOS out with some answers if you have a better answer than the one I've just given. But thank you very much for your donation. I appreciate it. Let's carry on.
Thinking as long as I've got my information correct and all of this, that this cliff is now also where this medieval castle is. What a fantastic place to excavate. Okay, that looks so picturesque. I'd love to visit one day. How brilliant. I love it. So European. That's exactly what Americans think we're up to all the time, okay? Digging up bones under castles. But it's great. I love it. 13 specimens were sampled, and it turns out these belonged to 6 individuals
that were excavated in Ranis. And the one specimen that we were able to get a high coverage genome from is we call Ranis 13. And this was the best preserved Ice Age remain that we so far found from a modern human. The DNA preservation was really, really good. around 40%, which is like almost unheard of, except from Denisova K for this time interval. So we were actually very lucky in that sense.
So by 40%, you mean you're able to get 40% of their genome?
No, actually, it means that from the DNA extraction, the DNA extract we got, it was 40% of that was the genome from this individual.
Okay.
Because we had many other things, right? Microbial DNA, contaminant DNA, and all the other things from that are sequenced also with the DNA of the individual. When I meant that we obtained a high coverage genome, it means that each position on the genome of this person was sequenced multiple times. So we cover most of the genome, and we cover this part like in 30 copies. You know, if we call, for example, a genome is 30x, that means that each position on the genome on average was covered by 30 reads. So we have a pretty good idea which base is at that position.
All of the samples from Zlati Kuhn and Ranis date to around 45,000 years ago. It's impossible to say which of the two is older because sort of the date estimates overlap. So it's likely they lived within a couple of hundred years of each other. And in fact, for two of the specimens, this simply must.
Just once again, saying I'm okay with the illustrative technique that's being used here. It's much more realistic and I think much more accepting of the data. Now, yeah, I just want to point it out once again. So I do appreciate that. I know a lot of people are saying in the comments that this channel is kind of like an operating arm of Max Planck Institute. Maybe I'll have to look at more of the videos. I've looked at a few. I like most of them, but I'll keep looking. But I do appreciate the imagery that's being used here at least.
Must have been the case.
So what we found was that two individuals from Ranis were either 5th or 6th degree related to the individual we find in Zlati Kuhn, and this 5th or 6th degree relatedness means they were either distant cousins or maybe grandmother or grandchild or something like this. So it's really family if you think of it. So this was actually for me very surprising because, you know, it's very difficult to find human remains that are so old, yet alone having DNA from those specimens, right? Usually we don't get anything. And we were, you know, so lucky to get this. And what is the chance of finding individuals that are actually like family, genetically speaking, family with each other in these two sites? It was really surprising to me.
There was also a mother and daughter pair found at Ranis, which is very nice. Tugs at the heartstrings. Yeah, very cool. It's always nice to find a family connection. It appeals to something within us, I think, within me, certainly. It's always nice to see a family. Always makes me feel a little bit soppy, but you never know. Maybe they all hated each other and didn't get on, so you never know. But
at least they died together, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's kind of a sad thought. Maybe they all died together now.
Maybe
what happened to them?
This out from the show.
Yeah. However these families died, bit of a bummer of a thought. It seems that their ancestors interbred with Neanderthals between 45 and 49,000 years ago. So roughly 47,000 years ago. This was the same conclusion that Leonardo's paper came to, but he had a totally different study, totally different methodology.
So if you remember maybe high school biology, there's a thing called meiosis, where the parental chromosomes get shuffled during the process of producing sperm and eggs. So we call this process recombination, and this is going to be really important. And so now, when we had this admixture event, we had a Neanderthal, we had a modern humans, and they made an offspring. And this offspring will always have one set of chromosomes being from a modern human, and the other set of the chromosomes being from a Neanderthal. So what happens next is that during the meiosis of these individuals, the two chromosomes will exchange parts. So the Neanderthal actually will break down, right? It will get kind of shuffled with the modern human one. And over time, the shuffling occurs over and over and over again. And the Neanderthal segments, once being a full chromosome, will get shorter, shorter, and shorter. And this is why we have these small segments when we look on present-day individuals. And this is also how we can date everything that we did.
I hope this is a good analogy. Leonardo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of imagine it to like cutting a pizza, right? You could continue cutting and cutting a pizza. The slices are going to get smaller and smaller. The amount of pizza isn't going to change. That's probably happening in our genes all the time, right? This Neanderthal DNA is getting chopped up, but we're not sleeping with any more Neanderthals, so the amount doesn't vary. Obviously, we can lose Neanderthal genes if they're being selected against, and that almost certainly has happened. But it seems like it's pretty closely fixed at about 2% of everyone's genome at the minute.
So remember, this is just to once again have a little bit of a reminder about that this is not a universal perspective. It's obviously being accepted quite widely. But like I said, we have other geneticists who think that the Neanderthal contribution is much larger, but it's been selected against. And essentially, a lot of those genes, one of the things that perhaps is not touched on as much is that the Neanderthal populations were much smaller and therefore had much more defective gene base than the Homo sapiens that they bred with. And therefore, their genes were consistently selected against. So if you think about these waves of migration that took place from the African continent into Eurasia, not just a single event, but the multiple ones, each one is going to make the people who are being bred with less Neanderthal, more Homo sapien. But on top of that, that's going to be compounded by the fact that essentially with each, each round of breeding, you should say, or maybe with each generation, what you'll find is that the Neanderthal DNA essentially is taking a beating because it's more beneficial for the offspring to be more Homo sapien to improve its likelihood of survival. Okay, because that's what ultimately what it comes down to is survival. Okay, that's why your genes are going to be making decisions, are going to be recombining in a certain way, and also mutations are going to be dropped or picked up as they're going to help the survival rate of the offspring. So that's kind of what's taking place here. So this isn't a universal view, the 2%, but also the 10 to 20% is also not a universal view. So, but we have to be aware that both of these kind of theories exist when it comes to the non-African populations.
After 40 plus thousand years within us, these chunks of DNA are so small.
And fortunately, we can go back in time, right? Because of the ancient DNA. We can sample basically, okay, how did the Neanderthal ancestry look like 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago? Or even like in Ara's case, like 43 point whatever thousand years ago. So extremely close to when Neanderthals and modern humans actually met.
Leonardo's study had a diverse set of modern genomes, people from all over the world, different places, plus 59 ancient genomes. And that kind of allows us to rewind the clock. Using all of these, looking at all of these, Leonardo and the team, they can kind of get a sense about when this Neanderthal lovemaking occurred.
So like the center of this, or the peak of interbreeding was at 47,000 years, but it had this duration, right? Mm-hmm. So it started maybe at 51,000 years ago and went on to almost 40,000 years ago.
So we have two different data sets, two different studies coming to the same conclusion about Neanderthal lovemaking, that it happened roughly about 47,000 years ago, but certainly by around 50,000 years ago, 51,000 years ago. What does any of that have to do with that pic? Let's get to that pic.
I'm just going to pause here really quickly. I want to read out this comment that's been left by 42 tribes. It said 3 or 4 Neanderthals and 1 Denisovan had their pigment genes tested. Feel free to drop a link to the study as well. 42 tribes, so people can kind of obviously check out what you've said here. He said all were dark skinned, but Denisovans were darker than all the Homo sapiens tested too. The Denisovan was Dinka black. Now, I'm inclined to believe this to be true because even the modern studies, the ones like the ones that we looked at in the last live streams, dictated that even the highly Neanderthalized populations in Europe, so not just the groups like Natufian, for instance, who don't carry any Neanderthal ancestry, even the ones that were essentially quote unquote kind of like default modern European, or have even higher amounts like maybe Far East Asians, even they were found to be of dark pigment not too long ago. So we do know there's a separation between a depigmentation of the skin, i.e. the mutation that is pale skin across Europe, which they're finding they need to push more recent as the years go on, and the Neanderthal admixture. At least that's what's being suggested here. I still think that there's a lot of gray area in terms of humans, kind of like what human interbreeding looks like. I feel like these dates might start to marry more when people are a bit more honest about the number of migrations that took place from Africa. I feel like these dates might start to marry more. But yeah, it's interesting to note that, and it's probably good that you pointed that out as well. Because I hadn't mentioned that, so thank you for sharing. Okay.
This pig was found at a site called Liang Karampuang on the southern tip of Sulawesi, an island in Indonesia. My apologies if I said the name wrong. Seems like an absolutely lovely tropical island, home to 20 million people, some incredible wildlife. Karampuang Cave seems to sit in this really spectacular rock outcrop, and estimating from the diagrams in the paper here, but perhaps about 35 meters from the cave entrance, across seemingly quite jagged rocks, humans, a very, very long time ago, painted these incredible scenes. The people behind the study interpret this as a pig and perhaps 3 humans around it. I think that's a good interpretation. Certainly looks like a pig to me. All the wiry fur, wiry bristles. It just might be the oldest piece of narrative artwork ever found. There are other pieces of artwork found, and maybe they had a story to them, but not obviously, right? It's not obvious that they did. But here, 3 people around this huge pig, there's probably a story behind it. This might be the oldest evidence of like storytelling we have. It's really special, very, very cool. Scientists were able to date this.
It would be nice to know what the comparative artworks look like for him to make the statement, or at least the conclusion, that this might be the oldest type of narrative artwork. But yeah, let's carry on playing and see where we get with this
artwork by dating the calcium that builds up on top of it from like the water dripping in this cave. And so you can deduce a point in time where this painting must have been made at, right? Because it's underneath this calcium buildup that is this specific age. And according to those results, this artwork was made at least 51,200 years ago. Very, very long time ago. And not only is it a long time ago, but it's kind of getting close to that upper limit of this Neanderthal inbreeding. If this artwork was in the Middle East, in Iraq, Syria, somewhere like that, wouldn't be a problem, right? This is the region where humans are living, they're interacting with Neanderthals. 51,000 years, perfect. That's bang on time. But all the way in Sulawesi, thousands of miles from there, thousands of kilometers. Could our ancestors really have gotten there so quickly? This isn't the only archaeological...
Now, that statement in itself is a bit bizarre, because do you remember the initial discussion? The initial premise of this was that the date for human progression from the African continent into Eurasia, or outside of Africa, let's just say outside of Africa, is being pushed back all the time. You know, as far back as 100,000, you know, it's being pushed back constantly. The only thing that's being pushed forward is the date that they think that humans interbred with Neanderthals. So my question is, why do Neanderthals need to be a part of this discussion? Okay, why do Neanderthals need to be a part of this discussion? That's the part that I don't get. I don't understand why Neanderthals need to be a part of this discussion, because it seems to me like humans had been making their way into Eurasia for a long time before they started breeding with Neanderthals. And we know there were human populations that were in Eurasia that never bred with Neanderthals. We know that. That's a fact. We have the genetic data of very late out of Africa populations, you know, dating back, like I said, into the Neolithic. If we're talking about, once again, the Tufians or, another group who don't have any Neanderthal ancestry and yet are declared to be a part of this original out of Africa kind of like movement. So therefore have been lingering around for what, 10, 20, 30,000 years and never interbreeding with the Neanderthal populations. That's what the science that we're being given tells us. So the fact that it kind of coincides with this starting date, the implication that I'm getting from this is that humans needed Neanderthals to create artwork. Because he kind of made a couple of statements there, and it sounds like that's what he's saying. It's like, oh, well, if this was in the Middle East, we know that they're meeting with Neanderthals, so if the artwork is there, it's fine. But this is really far out. And the artwork, could they have bred with Neanderthals and done that far? Well, maybe they didn't breed with Neanderthals. I'd say that the evidence tells us that Homo sapiens sapien is perfectly capable of producing artwork without having interbred with Neanderthals. So I'm struggling, at least I could be reading this wrong, but I'm struggling to understand why they're being brought into the conversation for this particular insight. That's what I'm just kind of, I'm struggling to get that.
Logical site from this region, which is really getting kind of old. There was another one called Tampa Ling in what is Laos, found these really fragmentary human remains. Now, based on the measurements of them, they are tentatively assigned to Homo sapiens. They don't seem to have these, thick brow ridges, for example, of other archaic human groups like Neanderthals and presumably Denisovans. They date to between 68 and 86,000 years ago. Down in Australia...
So there we go. So we have so I guess that reinforces my point there. We have pure human remains being found dating back in Southeast Asia, around the Polynesian region as well, dating 65,000, 70, 80, 90,000 years. So this is, it's just a question mark I was raising there as to, I was trying to understand why we were trying to relate those artworks to Neanderthal. That's not why I'm still not seeing that.
Site called Majid Bebe, dated at the minute between 65 and 53,000 years ago. And in China, they have several sites that they claim to have been home to modern humans, Homo sapiens, older than 70,000 years ago. All of these predate that episode of Neanderthal lovemaking, and therefore out of Africa. I really wanted to ask Arev and Leonardo, how do they reconcile this conflicting data?
So there we're placing, this is where I think we have an issue, because what we're doing is we're conflating out of Africa and Neanderthal. That's what he just basically said, that it predates Neanderthal thingy and therefore out of Africa. No, it doesn't predate out of Africa. That's the point. This is just proving the fact that modern humans were out of Africa for millennium before any interbreeding with Neanderthal took place. I don't think it doesn't need qualification. I think that's, the science agrees with that. So what we're doing here is the attempt to merge out of Africa with Neanderthal interbreeding is taking place. Like can you see what I was saying about the oversimplification? There was this one out of Africa event, and during that out of Africa event, there was a huge orgy with Neanderthals that produced the entirety of the world's population that's not African. And that's when it happened. And that's it. Then we have two populations, one crossbred with Neanderthal, and one that's remained fully human or remained fully Homo sapien. And that happened 50,000 years ago, and never the twain shall meet up until really recently. That's not realistic. It's not supported, and it's contradicted by the data that they're even presenting in this discussion. So I don't know why this unrealistic view of the human experience is being kind of promoted. It doesn't make any sense to me.
The first way these data could be reconciled, the genetic data and the archaeological data could be reconciled, is that we've made a mistake somewhere. And in a certain sense, that could be true, right? Because we don't know everything about our DNA. We certainly have not found every archaeological site. We haven't even found 1% of 1% of all the archaeological sites. So all of these data points could be resolved by further research that has corrected some oversight that we have unknowingly made. All of that is possible. But it is interesting that Leonardo and Arif's study, using different data, still came to the same conclusion. And in fact, the genetic data has kind of been pointing towards this younger date for quite a while now.
So I think they estimated it 41 to 55,000 years ago is one of these estimates. And our estimates are in this interval.
I was not really surprised. Like Bill said, it was already suggested that these dates are possible. So it's not really out of the range of anything that was suggested before. So it was cool because, we can get really precise date compared to the previous estimates.
So if the dates from this DNA are true, that this is when the Neanderthal love went down, then how else can we reconcile it? It could be possible that the sites that we have assigned to Homo sapiens were not made by Homo sapiens. Perhaps the pig at Sulawesi was produced by a Denisovan. It could be possible. We have to keep our minds open to that possibility.
Why are we not exploring the most logical possibility, and that's that not every single human that left Africa interbred with Neanderthal? This is something that you already know is correct. We already know this to be true. This continued to be true for the entirety of human existence outside of Africa, that there were certain populations that didn't carry any Neanderthal ancestry. So this is a bit bizarre to me, because it's like, well, they're not interbred with Neanderthal, so who made the art? I don't understand this. Honestly, I am racking my brain here as to why the simplest proposition is not being considered, and that's that these were just humans who left Africa and who remained, endogamous with other humans and didn't feel a need to interbreed with Neanderthals. That's what the suggestion would say. That's what all of the data is pointing towards. I'm really, really struggling with this one. I'm not going to lie. This part here is not making much sense to me. Feel free to continue to try and explain it to me. I've got a donation to read out, so thank you very much, Macy. I'm trying to find your comment on here. Here we go. Did I read that one already? I'm unclear where. No, we read that one already. Why aren't my comments updating here? Oh, here it is. Sorry, my comments are taking this time. Macy said they're trying to upgrade Neanderthals too. Yeah, we already know that. We're very, very aware of the fact that Neanderthals are becoming more and more sophisticated as the years are going on. Neil deGrasse Tyson was quite explicit when he explained the fact that they've basically had a a complete makeover since they realized that they were the ancestor of all non-Africans. If it had been the other way around and they'd found out that only Africans carry Neanderthal DNA and everyone else was 100% Homo sapien, they would be telling you that Neanderthals were the dumbest creatures. Are Neanderthals the reason for Africa's troubles? You can imagine the articles they'd be producing. Africa's interbreeding. Could it be called bestiality? They'll be coming with all of you can imagine the shade they'd be throwing at Africa if this was the other way around. But obviously we're used to this since it's, their kind of like, since this is their kind of like, what's the word to say? I don't know. Since this is their, I'm not going to say mistake, but their kind of like decision to interbreed with Neanderthals, it's now going to be humanized. It's going to be really, really presented in the most sensible and logical manner. And they're going to personify Neanderthals as much as possible to not have to answer for the fact that, essentially, they're the ones who carry the DNA and not Africans. So it's just quite interesting. That's all. Let's carry on.
Currently, though, all the really accurate, realistic artwork of prehistoric life is assigned to Homo sapiens. All the other tentative signs of artwork and symbolism that are believed to have been produced by Neanderthals, they're just a little bit more abstract. It seems they never depicted real life so accurately.
And I would, with all due respect, check all of these artworks. Feel free to post studies for these to see if they actually were produced by Neanderthal. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but I'm yet to be convinced, because you've already seen the, I'm not going to say reaching, but I'm going to say reaching that just occurred there, where this artwork was found. And just because of the timing of the artwork, the date that the artwork was produced, there was a real push and a need to make it have been the result of Neanderthals either by themselves or Neanderthal, interbreeding with Homo sapien. It's like there's zero acceptance that this could have been done outside of Neanderthal admixture. I don't, like I said, I've already said anyway, I don't need to go over it. It's just, yeah. So it will be interesting to see the other things they classify as being Neanderthal artwork. I'd be interested to see anyway.
Like we tend to do. Who knows why? Still, we have to keep our minds open to the possibility we are looking at the art of a completely different branch of humanity, or that the bones at Tampaling are not modern humans, but Denisovans, something like that, another population of humans. Entirely possible. But if the pig was drawn by modern humans, and it predates out of Africa, or at least predates the out of Africa that we descend from.
There. It predates the out of Africa that we descend from. But there was out of Africa's. That's what I wanted to hear. So this is okay. Let me let him carry on speaking now anyway. But that's what I wanted to hear. So we just bring it back and see where he goes from this, because that's the logic that I wanted to see if we could get there.
And it predates out of Africa, or at least predates the out of Africa that we descend from. Then it must have been made by another group of Homo sapiens, another out of Africa that we didn't know about.
So it could be that there were other smaller out of Africa events before this main one that met with Neanderthals.
Whether this earlier out of...
And just another logic argument that I have to make here. We talk about these, when you hear these events talked about with kind of these weird absolutes. And when I say weird absolutes, is when we talk about any human experience and we try to define it with hard lines that aren't essentially nuanced, and we define it as all or nothing, and then we have to use words like bottleneck, to describe it, why there's only one type, and then founder effect, all of the, to me, a lot of the time, these different, explanatory methods are being used to try to sell something that's illogical. Why am I saying this? Because it's logical. Let's say there was one single out of Africa integration into Europe or Eurasian space, okay? Is it likely that every single human that was a part of that would have interbred with Neanderthal? Or is it more likely that some of them, probably a vast minority, would have interbred with Neanderthal, and a vast majority would have only bred with other humans? Do you think they all just arrived, 50,000 of them, and found 50,000 Neanderthals and said, let's go, matching time, pair up? Like, does that sound logical to you? It's illogical. It's much more logical that a lot of people didn't interbreed, and you had the patterns of people who didn't have Neanderthal ancestry. The attempt to collapse all of this into a single event, a lot of it is just, a lot of it leaves a lot to be desired. There's too much, what's the word? There's too much kind of like, I don't want to say assumption. It's more than that. There's too much implied, and too much reaching, really, is the best word I can say, It's too much reaching, too much implied, and not enough just kind of, what's logical in this situation. What's logical is nuance. What's logical is a gray area is a good word. Thank you, African Surf. What's logical is, you know, a much more natural occurrence. What's logical is not one migration and then they closed the gate or the force field of Africa after they left. What's logical is if Africans left, Africans continued to leave, and they just kept leaving throughout history. That's why we have a population called the Ibero-Mauritians. Okay? Everyone talks about the Ibero-Mauritians, but doesn't talk about the fact that they spanned 2 continents and they were completely consistent. From Mauritania, i.e. from northwest Africa to the Iberian Peninsula, this single population was entirely consistent and remained consistent for several thousands of years. We call them the Ibero-Mauritians. That suggests multiple events back and forth between Africa and the Eurasian continent. This is a normal, logical pattern of human behavior, not single punctuated events, giant bottlenecks, founder effects. That's not even supported by, once again, we talked about the haplotype data that we have, which suggests that Africa has all of the haplotype variation that's found outside of Africa, essentially. And there's only one way that can happen is if you have constant 2-way flow or 1-way flow, whatever it is, but constant contact has to happen until all of that variety is being covered. Let's give a quick thank you to Talia. She says there were most likely many different out of Africa migrations and all did not admix with Neanderthal. That is logical to me. Okay, that's absolutely logical to me. Right, that's entirely logical to me. By the way, Diali, I just want to respond to you. I am fully aware that Ibero-Mauritians had no European DNA. I think you're absolutely correct. We did cover this in the last study. I think they had 2/3 Natufian DNA and 1/3 sub-Saharan. And we've already talked about the Natufians having no Neanderthal ancestry, and sub-Saharans obviously have no Neanderthal ancestry. So when we're talking about the Ibero-Mauritians, we're talking about a group that essentially was entirely Homo sapien or Afro sapien, as we like to call them here. Okay, entirely non-admixed with modern humans who all carry that Neanderthal ancestry. So I totally agree with you. So I wasn't suggesting the otherwise. I was just suggesting the fact that this single group remained consistent for a long stretch of time, and they wasn't confronted with this out of Africa barrier that stopped them from moving. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to maintain consistent population across the 2 continents for that stretch of time. So yeah, I'm entirely in agreement with you there. Let's carry on.
Africa migration were our ancestors. It's a very tricky thing to say. Certainly, it seems on the whole, no. But there's always a possibility that they contributed DNA in a very slight way, very, very slight way.
That's more correct to say. I would also say it didn't contribute anything major, right? Because there could be slight contributions from these populations, but we cannot really detect it so well, and we cannot date it so well. So
the other possibility is that the humans that made this artwork didn't contribute to our ancestry in any meaningful sense because they died out. They went extinct. They went locally extinct. Sometimes it's hard to think about humans kind of going extinct a little bit, right? Because in our time, it's so easy to view our globe-spanning success and technological development as almost predetermined, guaranteed.
Can I just jump in at this point and say a lot of human populations have gone extinct as a result of European expansionism? Yeah, it's no secret. The Portuguese were responsible for multiple extinctions of human groups. The British were responsible for multiple extinctions of human groups in Africa, outside of Africa, across Europe and across Asia. So I know it's in this world, modern world of sensibilities, where everyone's kind of all a little bit more enlightened. It seems so, imagine people going extinct. It was like, yeah, unfortunately, loads of people. We're really fortunate to be alive today, particularly if you're melanated. You're very fortunate to be breathing, because I would say a lot of the European groups did their darndest to make a lot of people extinct. So that's just the reality. I just want to kind of like throw that one in there.
Guaranteed. Of course, that's what we were going to do. But the Paleolithic world, it really was a different world. It was a hard world. Humans at that time lived in very, very small groups. And actually, thanks to Arev's paper, we can get an insight into how large these communities were.
Yeah, we do. So using the genetic information, we can also estimate what we call effective population size. So it's how many individuals in each generation were producing offspring. And this was for the Ranis Slatikun population. It was about 200, at most 300 individuals.
Now, effective population size only counts breeding individuals. So there were certainly children and older people in this community that are not counted in these genetic estimates. But it's entirely possible at the time that the people of Ranis were living, maybe there was 1,000 people across Europe. It's so hard to imagine how empty of humans their world was. Like now, living in a city with 1 million people, it seems so hard to believe, so hard to picture. But that is the world that they lived in. You can easily imagine in a world where the human population is so small that the deaths of a few key people or a couple of bad years in a row could wipe out whole communities, whole human lineages. And we can kind of see that happening in Arev's paper. I really wanted to ask her if any modern people descend from that population at Ranis. It's so much nuance even saying like we descend from them, but we descend from the same out of Africa event. But
Yes.
Do we descend from this population as well, or is that impossible to say?
We don't find any evidence for that. So all the groups that live today and also the ancient genomes, they seem to be equally distant from this group, which indicates that there was no gene flow into any of those, or they did not leave any ancestry in any of those groups, which is what we call also like a dead end or extinct group. We don't detect any ancestry from these individuals in any later human remain. I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but it seems that they died out. Yeah.
Well, maybe not unfortunate for us, but certainly for them, probably.
Yeah, definitely.
And they don't, yeah. They don't. No one alive today seemingly descends from that population at Ranis. At some point, they all died. Probably very, very likely that this happened to many human groups.
The human history is not necessarily a history of success. There were probably more branches that split and died out than the one that led to us and colonized, outside of Africa.
Well, I think that's a really poignant point that she's made there, talking about the fact that, the human experience is not necessarily a successful one because there's so many branches of it that effectively died out, much more died out than the ones that actually survived. But the one thing I did want to say is we can juxtapose this with the picture in Africa. And maybe for someone like me, who's more coming from a historical anthropological place, where, a lot of diversity that once existed in the Eurasian land space has been killed out. And we can't ignore. A lot of the time, a lot of the way these subjects are approached is like everything is some kind of natural occurrence. It's like people almost create this, they almost take this very withdrawn approach to the way that they analyze, and they never want to point the finger of accusation at any one particular group or any kind of like, they just go, oh, well, a lot of people died and this, that, and the other. But if you look, why is it that Africa has all of that genetic diversity? Why is it that you have so many different groups of people, so many different ethnic groups living in such close proximity on the African continent? And yet when you come to Europe, you have this absorption, this bottleneck of really a single type of mankind that has essentially wiped out all of the different types of mankind that were once there. You have to ask that question. You have to honestly raise that point. You can't just approach it from a, oh, it just happened kind of thing. Oh, it's really sad. It's like, okay, there has been man-made intervention. There has been human intervention to create that picture where we have this really narrow subset of humanity essentially expanded, because you can see it in the American continent right now. The people who are currently populate America, they're not the indigenous Americans. America had a varied, diverse indigenous population that has been largely wiped out. That is now a minority on that continent, or in those continents, I should say. And the people that are there are the same people that populate most of Europe and a large part of Asia and a lot of Northern Africa as well. These are single groups, single undiversified groups. And I think a lot of time these terms like bottleneck and founder effect, they're used as euphemisms for genocide. That's what they use for euphemisms for, as euphemisms for population replacement. And I think modern Europeans reconciling with the fact that they genocided a large part of a large amount of the diversity across Europe and across America and across most of the world, and then reconciling that with the fact that they also want to claim the populations that were there before them as their ancestors. You see this war taking place where they really want to position themselves. They want to go, oh, that's our ancestors, got nothing to do with you. Oh, why are you trying to claim Stonehenge? People who built the Stonehenge were black, because history says they were black. And it also says that there was a population replacement, i.e. a genocide that wiped them out. That's what history tells us. Oh, Cheddar Man's our ancestor. Cheddar Man was black. And history also tells us there was a population replacement event, a bottleneck event, a founder effect event that wiped out him and all his lineage. It's just euphemisms for genocides, multiple genocides that have taken place. And seeing them kind of trying to reconcile the fact that their ancestors were responsible for these population replacements and simultaneously try to claim the history of these entire land masses, that is the mental gymnastics that we that we experience. That's what we're experiencing here. That is what modern anthropology is. It's these modern European populations not accepting the fact that they are responsible for a large amount of the genocides that have taken place. That's a bit of a fact. Okay, that's a bit of a fact.
So it's likely the norm that these populations got extinct and did not survive.
In the twists and turns of that huge, long Paleolithic history, life was not guaranteed. It's so interesting because our success seems so predetermined, and our success at the expense of Neanderthals, you can't help but think as like some innate ability we had compared to them and blah, 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 blah. But it could be chance, man. It could be chance, like just enough rolls of the dice, and we're six. I don't know where I'm going with this metaphor, but our ancestors survived. They were just the lucky roll of the dice. The people who drew the pig at Rannis, their descendants died out, a dead end. Yeah, kind of sobering to think about.
Cool. That's the end of the video. And like I said, not a bad one. We sit here, we go through these videos.
We have been evolving for
Was that? We don't want any more videos going up. We go through these videos, and like I said, particularly when it comes to other creators who do put their kind of like neck on the line, independent researchers, I'm never going to sit here and, poo-poo the work they do. I really enjoyed that video. It was very informative, a very brave subject that he tackled there. And I thought it would be quite interesting to hear some of those statements from the mouths of the geneticists who actually do the work. Because a lot of the time people get in these internet silos where they're kind of echo chambers, and they think they're all kind of like, and they don't understand how these things work, and real geneticists do understand how these things work. So perhaps hearing it from them will explain things a bit clearer to them, how a lot of these things have worked historically. So yeah, I told you I wasn't going to have too much of a long live stream, and it seems a shame because we've got 410 people with us, and we've kind of maintained over 400 for quite a long time in the stream. So that's amazing. How many likes do we have? 265 likes. That's at least 135 short for everyone who's in the stream. So if you're in the stream right now, hit the like button if you've enjoyed it. please leave a positive comment. And sorry, Marcus Antonius was like, you're like, keep rolling, bro. I'm like, no. I think we're in a good place there. I think it was a bit of a watch back. We have a good opportunity to discuss these things here. I could go on, but I'm going to close out the subject now, because I feel like we're going to get another opportunity. We literally just discussed this topic, well, a topic close to it, a few days ago. And I feel like we're going to get more and more opportunities to discuss these things in more detail. One of the reasons I'm going to wrap up now is because I don't feel like I've normally got a little bit of a repository of studies and stuff or articles that I can refer to further kind of like contribute my thoughts. I haven't got any of that today. So I don't feel like I'd be able to provide you with much qualitative stuff beyond what I've given you in today's live stream. I hope it was really interesting. I've had, like I always have, a fantastic time with you guys. The comments, can I just kind of reiterate something? People constantly come. It was quite interesting. When I was doing, I think the last live stream I had, someone came into the comments who obviously wasn't a regular. And they made a couple of comments, and then there was like, they made this statement. They were like, oh, people in this comment section seem really well schooled. Like, they made the statement, but they said it like they were really surprised. And I was like, yeah, welcome to the TKM family. Yeah. We don't suffer fools kindly here. You know, if you're going to come prepared, come ready, but also feel free to ask questions and we will try to answer them as well as we can, or at least as honestly as possible. I hope you guys have all enjoyed the stream. I am going to wrap it up there. What about the other video? That's fair. Let's do that. I'm not going to wrap it up. I know I lost 20 people who quickly left when I said that. We're going to watch one more video, because I did say I was going to watch this, and I guess there is a bit of time for me to put this on. So I'm going to put on one more video. Okay. And this is one that you've seen before, but it's just, it's within the realm of relevance to what was being discussed here. So let's put it on. It's the David Reich video. So I did promise that I was going to play that if there was time, and admittedly there was time. So let's pop that on before we wrap it up today. I'm gonna have to find the abbreviated version, because there's it's actually a 2-hour podcast. This must be it. Okay, I think I found the link, so let me just quickly click on this.
Already the common ancestors of Neanderthals.
I think this is it. Fingers crossed for me that I found the right one, guys. Okay, and let's get going with this. Okay.
Already the common ancestors of Neanderthals and modern humans probably had a brain as large as ours. And it's almost certainly the case that Neanderthals were communicating in ways that are probably pretty complicated, complex, and amount to some kind of language. But some people think that language in its modern form is not that old and might coincide with the later Stone Age, Upper Paleolithic revolution 50 to 100,000 years ago, and might be specific to our lineage, and that there might be a qualitative shift in the type of language that's being used. There's been one incredibly interesting and weird line of genetic evidence that was so weird that a lot of people I know dropped off the paper. They just didn't want to be associated with it because it was so weird, and they just thought it might be wrong. But it's stood up, as far as I can tell. It's just so weird. So the line of evidence I'm talking about is one based on epigenetic modification of genomes. So just to explain what that means, the genome is not just a sequence of letters, DNA letters, adenines, thymines, guanines, and cytosine, ACTG. It also is decorated in anybody's cells by modifications that tell the genes when to be on and off in what conditions. So an example of such a modification is methylation in cytosine-guanine pairs. So this turns down a gene and makes it not functional in certain tissues. And this methylation is bestowed by cellular environments and differs in different cells and also in different species to identify which genes are more active or more passive. And it's not directly encoded by the ACTGs locally. It's encoded by something else and sometimes even passed on by your parent directly. So it's really very interesting. So this can be read off ancient genomes. The methylation pattern survives in Denisovan and Neanderthal genomes, and we can actually learn which genes were turned down and turned up. So work by David Gochman and Liron Carmel and colleagues created these maps of where in the Neanderthal genome, where in the Denisovan genome, and where in modern human genomes genes are turned on and off. And there's a lot of technical complexity to this problem, but they identified differentially methylated regions, several thousand parts of the sections of the genome that were consistently and very differently turned down or turned up in Neanderthals and modern humans. And when they looked at the set of differentially methylated region, roughly 1,000 of them, that were systematically different on the modern human lineage, and asked what characterized them, was their particular biological activities that was very unusual on the modern human specific lineage, there was a huge statistical signal that was very, very surprising and very, very unexpected, and it was the vocal tract. So it was the laryngeal and pharyngeal tract, and because you can actually learn from little kids with congenital malformations, when a gene gets knocked out by an inborn error of genetic inheritance, kids will have, for example, a face that looks different or a vocal tract that looks different and so on. You know what the effect of knocking out these genes is. We can actually imply directionality to how the modern human-specific changes are. And the directionality is to change the shape of the vocal tract, which is soft tissue, not preserved in the skeletal record, to be like the way ours is distinctive from chimpanzees. So in the shape that we know is very helpful for the articulation of the range of sounds we use that chimpanzees don't have in their laryngeal and pharyngeal tract. So even though we don't have surviving hard tissue like skeletons from this part of the body, we now have this methylation signature, which suggests that these changes have occurred specifically on our lineage and are absent in both the Neanderthal and Denisovan lineages. So if you think this change in the vocal tract is important in language, which seems possibly reasonable, then maybe that's telling you that there's very important changes that have happened in the last 500,000 or a few 100,000 years, specifically on our lineage, that were absent in Neanderthals and Denisovans.
Now, that wasn't the video that I wanted to show you, but that one was quite interesting nonetheless, because he's essentially said there that Neanderthals wouldn't have been able to speak. So Neanderthals didn't have a version of speech, at least not like ours. So perhaps that already goes some way to debunking some of the recent Neanderthal revisions. It wasn't quite what I was looking at, but I've actually found a couple of interesting clips that I want to put up for you. So here's another one, since you guys are here and so this one's
so the Yamnai are these groups that thrive.
You are a weak.
So the Yamnai
goes some way to qualify the last statement I made before closing the stream, before reopening the stream. So this one's quite interesting because let me let it play anyway.
are these groups that thrived between about 5,300 and 4,600 years ago in the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas. They're probably the first people to domesticate the horse. So they expanded to the little island of the steppe that's in the Great Hungarian Plain in the Carpathian Basin. You look at the genetic data and there's a 90% population disruption. So one of the mysteries of the Yamnai expansion was everybody had this cognitive bias to think this is very male-driven. You look at the genetic data and you look at the Y chromosomes, which track male migration, and the mitochondrial sequences, which are more sensitive to female migration, and it looks like the steppe expansion is very both sexes. The most likely explanation for what's happening now is that it actually is a male-biased process, but it's one that's interrupted. So the Yamnai expansion is very male biased. It expands to the edge of the range. They encounter the chorded-ware, and in fact, the chorded-ware males absorb and take Yamnai of females, and then they expand further. So the Yamnai are...
So that one's about the Yamnaya expansion, which a lot of people coincide as the kind of ancestors of modern Eurasians. Still haven't found what I was Sorry, guys. I think I just knocked down the stream there. Is everyone still there? Tell me you're still there. Did I knock down my stream? Am I still live? I think I'm still live. So I think I accidentally just knocked down the stream there, guys. Sorry. Bear with me. Okay, we're back. That was my fault. Got a bit excited. Still looking for that clip. Bear with me. I will find it. In fact, I've got it right here. So let me just pull it up. Let me just pull this back and try again. It's not that one. It's this one. This one's got some other stuff.
In a controversial new interview, Harvard
Added to
University
it. It will give
geneticist
you the
David
quote
Reich
after.
stated that all non-Africans are essentially evolved Neanderthals. Furthermore, he makes the case that rather than only 2 or 3% of our DNA coming from Neanderthals, Europeans are actually up to 20% Neanderthal. This is because Neanderthal DNA was removed from our genomes due to natural selection over the last 50,000 years.
That actually the proportion of non-Africans' ancestors who are Neanderthals is not 2%, which is the proportion of their DNA in our genomes today. If you're a non-African person, it's more like 10 or 20% of your ancestors are Neanderthals. So, if you want to make a strong argument, you might argue that non-Africans today are Neanderthals.
Neanderthals, who disappeared from the archaeological record around...
So that's the quote. He does go on there, but I just wanted to show the quote because I promised you that I would. Most of you who were on the stream last time, because I have mentioned it quite a bit, is that we're talking about this larger percentage or larger proportion of Neanderthal ancestry that's present, that they can infer used to be present. Well, they can infer is there, but it's not present explicitly within the genome. That's probably the best way to put it. So it's not present explicitly in the genome, but they infer that those are the proportions of Neanderthal ancestry that is there, which is obviously incredibly interesting, especially given it might explain why melanated people are the best singers, given what you said about the speech cords. Maybe they have slightly more developed speech cords. Who knows? These are things that you could relate to it. God knows. I don't know. But it's just very interesting. Human variation is a very, very interesting thing. And I'm going to actually stop speaking there before I get myself in trouble. Okay, so there's the video that I promised you. We've been going for how long now? 1 hour 47 minutes. That's a wrap up. We're gonna wrap this up, guys. Thank you, guys. And this isn't a wrap up where I'm gonna start the stream over again. This isn't absolutely a wrap up. Thank everyone for joining the stream. Thank those of you who have donated. I hope it's been relatively informative. I've had a great time, and as always, you guys have been leaving fantastic comments, so I'm going to read those and learn a lot from them. Even if I haven't read them out live, I do tend to watch back these live streams, go through the chat. So, and obviously you guys have great conversations with each other, so please do be as active as you like in the chat, provide some insight, provide some knowledge. And then if in the next live stream I'm spitting some facts that you have placed in the chat, you can pretty much probably be assured that I probably stole it from you. So there you go. But let's Africans gave us speech. That's a good way for us to leave, isn't it? Yeah, Africans gave us speech. Absolutely. The Homo Afro sapiens are responsible for for speech. So there you go. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you very much. Hit up the likes. Hope you had a fantastic time. And yeah, I'll see you all on the next one. Peace.